Well, one of the few people who talks any sense on proper drought relief is the Deputy Premier of New South Wales, a bushy John Barilaro. He's right here beside me. Peter's in Melbourne. Well, Barry, there you are. It's your responsibility. You've got to do it. You've got to feed the stock. You've got to provide the water. What do you make of those comments?
Yeah, look, I think, Alan, the problem we face here is we're in uncharted waters. We've never seen a drought like it, and to your point, we've got to respond in a way that we've never responded before. And, you know, from a state perspective, we've stopped the blame game, because that's what the community don't want to hear that, the farmers don't want to hear that, regional and rural communities don't want to hear that. And we'll take responsibility for what we are responsible for. But this is beyond those lines of responsibility. This has got to take a mighty effort by both the feds and us to get on with it. And, you know, we've already spent close to $100 million on transport subsidies, which is something you called for a number of years ago, and we backed you in on that one. Another $20 million in supporting fodder. But that's nowhere near enough, and we need to do more. I accept that, but it's got to be a partnership. There is no one going to be able to do this. No state or federal government on its own are going to be able to do this unless we actually get united. And the community is another part of it. The community is another big part of this. And, you know, here in Sydney, we're probably enjoying one of the most prosperous times as an economy, jobs, the whole lot. And we're doing, you know, but in the bush we're doing without. And the question I would ask, forget a war cabinet of more politicians. Let's get the mandate from the public, and you get it. Every day on your show I hear the mandate from the public, so get on with it. And if it means putting the budget into debt, borrow money, put it into deficit, look at ways of even pausing some election commitments or pausing some program funding.
But see, we've got
just fund our farmers.
We've got a HECS issue for students. Now, currently, we don't expect that students whose parents are poor shouldn't be allowed to go to university, so we go and the money is advanced and it's paid back down the track on interest. And currently that debt is about $66 billion. Now, you could have an agricultural HECS. Peter, I answer, as you know, this stuff every day, correspondence across my desk. It's getting worse and worse, and Nicole wrote to me yesterday about she's 30, and her husband committed suicide. He couldn't handle the circumstances he was facing. But then another, I won't name him, has written to me last week in which he said that he was shooting his cattle, but he was keeping one last bullet for himself. I then wrote a long letter to try and persuade him that there were people who cared and would listen. And he wrote a long letter back to me today, actually. And he thanked me for replying. He told me about shooting his cattle, and he'd make sure he kept one bullet, and he alluded to that. And then he wrote this letter back in which part he said, just imagine if Mr Morrison had to pull the trigger, placing the rifle barrel, and then he described what he'd done, and I won't share that with you. And then he said, the most distressing part is that this is finality. How would Mr Morrison feel? Would he panic? Now, Mr Morrison accused us last week, indirectly, and he meant me, of course, of panicking because we're asking for money to feed starving stock rather than send them to slaughter. This farmer said to me, pulling the trigger is the toughest thing anyone will ever have to do, but we do it with a calmness and a certainty that it is the only way. Better a dead cow than one who continues to suffer with no possibility of recovery. This is the stark reality of drought, and trust me, Prime Minister, it's not panic. It is the finality of drought, and there's not a bloody thing we can do about it. The feed's gone, and the water almost gone. Shooting cows is one thing, but every day picking up the carcasses of dead calves who've perished as they have nothing to eat and their mothers have no milk is heart-wrenching. It's just part of the daily grind now, and there's no relief in sight. Mr Morrison accuses many people, mostly desperate farmers and yourself, of panic. What a stupid response. If only they'd listen. As a result of your advocacy and the overwhelming public response, I was rather hopeful that we might get some sort of announcement from the Prime Minister yesterday, which was last Thursday. Yet here was Bridget McKenzie, the Agriculture Minister, beating her chest as to the generosity of the government in increasing the farm household allowance. He ends his letter to me saying, have you ever heard of a future drought fund which excludes assistance to farmers? Are they serious? Mate, he says to me, what can I say? On the subject of our dairy farmer friends, when I was a boy growing up, in my district there were 37 dairy farming families. Now there are none. Of those families who remained and changed to beef cattle, of those 37 families, only 2 remain, and I'm one of them. And he thanked me for taking the time to reply. This is every day. I beg, you do everything, and they think you're the enemy in Canberra simply because we're saying something has got to be done to protect the breeding stock.
Alan, I spend every day like hour outside of Parliament travelling the state. And I've done kilometre after kilometres, and you see the landscape. It is barren. There's no doubt about it. And I get to speak to farmers, and I've got to admit this. I get back to Sydney and I talk to colleagues. I talk to events here in Sydney, and all I hear is, let's do more. But I tell you what, I'm feeling hopeless. And this is the thing that I feel, and I'm the Deputy Premier.
Yeah, that's
we've got to do more together. I accept that. And there is investments required. I mean, you touched on the investment on CBD's investment in communities. That's just as important, because this drought is beyond the farm gate. Because, you know, when farmers aren't making money, they're not spending money. Not, you know, the local subcontractor, the local chippy, the tradie, the sparky, they're not getting any work. So I can actually accept investing in regional communities. Otherwise, we're not only going to lose the farms, but we're going to lose...
Let's bring Peter in. Peter, do you think that in Canberra they've now become obsessed with surplus? So, in other words, we can throw politically this argument at the Labor Party.
It's not the money. Yeah. It's not the money. It's not the money. What's required, Alan, is a rounding error in terms of the Commonwealth budget. But this has become, I think, a matter of pride for the Commonwealth, for the federal government, for the coalition. I think the Nats, I hate to say this, John, your colleagues in Canberra don't want to admit that they haven't done enough, and they don't want to then do something now and then cop criticism for sitting on their hands for months. I have to tell you, my experience tells me that punters have had enough of the hand-wringing of politicians, and if you were serious, you would have an immediate meeting of the premiers and the agricultural ministers at state and Commonwealth level of the drought-affected areas only. Don't bring in the states where there isn't drought, because otherwise you just have that constant COAG grandstanding. Just bring in those affected with drought in their communities, have a round table, and appoint someone like a Shane Stone, who's cleaned up the mess with the live cattle, with the Northern Australia flood cattle livestock issue. Get a can-do sort of person who thumps the table and drives the public servants into action. Put someone like that in charge and report to the Parliament every single time it sits in the Commonwealth, state, of New South Wales and Queensland, so everyone transparently knows what you're doing, where the money's going. A lot of people donated to this drought, and so many farmers say they have not seen a dollar. So there needs to be that sort of accountability. But you know how it works, John. Yeah. You guys could organise on Friday a meeting of the related premiers, a meeting of the agricultural ministers. You could sign a big fact check and get on with it. But you're frustrated because it's not happening. The feds are not calling for immediate action, and you're going to fry on this politically, because Labor don't get damaged by drought. Libs and Nats get damaged by drought.
See, Peter, you and I have talked about this in Barra. You can't even... I spoke to the Prime Minister. I said, righto, can you tell me, have you got an inventory of where these farms are that are in serious need? Are they beef farms, dairy farms, sheep farms, pig farms, goat farms? What are they? How many on them? What is the problem? So that you can actually pick up the phone. Mr Barilaro, Scott Morrison here. Now, I spoke to you last week. How are things going? Does the food arrive? The fodder arrive? Whatever. They can't even. We've got agricultural ministers coming out of our ears, bureaucrats all over the place. The bureaucracy in Canberra costs us $185 billion a year, and they can't tell you which farms are in a parlour state. There's something seriously wrong.
Yeah, and I couldn't tell you. And that's the honest truth. I'm being honest with you tonight. I couldn't tell you. And Peter, what you said is right. I mean, that's probably why you're a great chief of staff. There's no doubt about it. You were great. But the reality is, as I said earlier, we're in uncharted waters. There's no book here. We haven't been in this...
Well, are you going to pick up the phone to someone tomorrow? I mean, if you made a call to Scott Morrison, would he take the call?
Yeah, look, I think he would.
Well, ring him.
You know, when it came
and then I'll ring you.
When it came to water, when it came to dams, you know, Scott Morrison came to the table and to the party.
Yeah, they did. All credit, they did.
Yeah, he did. He drove that, and I have to give credit where credit is.
Yeah, I think his heart's in the right place, but he's listening to the wrong people. Now, we've run out of time, as we always do. Peter? Peter's in Melbourne.
Yes, boss.
Yes, boss. We will return to this subject because it might be embarrassing to the government, but this is now a political issue, not a drought issue. And the public out there, Peter is absolutely right. The public have had a gutful, and they are saying we want the breeding stock kept alive. The Prime Minister said on Tuesday, Monday in question time, that's your responsibility. You're saying it can't be done. We've got to gather together. Why doesn't he make it a national disaster? Why doesn't he bring in the army? They can truck water and fodder from wherever it is, introduce a HEC scheme. The farmer doesn't want anything for nothing. Bob Katter did this in Queensland when he was the primary industry minister in Queensland. He saved the sugar industry. He gave them the money, charged them 2%. When they paid it back, the taxpayer actually made money. It is possible and can be done.
And just one thought before you go to Alan. I know in the defence budget, literally hundreds of thousands of dollars are spent creating artificial exercises for the army to test their logistics. Let's not make up the exercises. Let's give them the farmers
the real
to
practical
help.
experience.
The real practical experience.
Well done. I'll put Peter Credlin in charge. Barra, thank you for coming. Thank you so much. John Barilaro,